Fantana. Ron, are you okay?
The man put it back, sir.
Calm down. Breathe, Ron. Breathe.
The man from the motorcycle.
What did the bad man do,
The
Ron?
motorcycle on the bridge. I hit him with a burrito.
Ron.
He took him with his foot, and he kicked him. That's what he did.
Someone punted him?
No, wait, let me say something. Let me say something.
What? I didn't understand a one word you said. Ron, are you okay? Ron. Ron, where are you?
I'm in a glass case of emotion.
I'm a psychologist and a neuroscientist by training. When I first began my career, I began with a question. Why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's slings and arrows and others more resilient? And that question is still central to all the work that we do. And we are particularly interested in how we can nudge people along this continuum to nourish and nurture the qualities that promote human flourishing. In the early part of my career, I focused almost exclusively on the negative side of the equation, on adversity, on the brain circuits that were important for understanding why some people are more vulnerable to stress, why others may be more likely to develop a depression or anxiety. And then something very significant happened in my life. In 1992, I first met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And this picture of His Holiness was taken in Madison, Wisconsin. And he's visited us several times. And he was the chief inspiration in our turning toward the positive. And in that critical moment in 1992, he challenged me and he said, why can't you use the same tools of modern neuroscience to study kindness and to study compassion in addition to studying anxiety and fear and depression and stress? And I didn't have a very good answer for him on that day other than that it's hard. But you know, when we first began to study kindness, when we first began to study anxiety and depression, that was hard too, and we've made some progress in that area. So the work that we and others have been doing is predicated on a critical insight in modern science, the insight concerning neuroplasticity. Our brains are constantly changing, constantly being shaped by the forces around us. But we have typically very little awareness of what those forces are. Our brains are changing wittingly or unwittingly. Most of the time, it's unwittingly. Most of the time, we're not aware, and we also have little control over those forces. And the invitation in the work that I'm sharing with you today is that we can actually take more responsibility for our own brains by transforming our minds. But first, let me share with you what some of the consequences of having our brains being shaped unwittingly are. And I'd like to focus on 4 challenges that have been critical in our society today. And these challenges are failures of well-being in very important ways. The first is distractibility. Research indicates that if we take people out and about in the world and we text them, and this has been done in a study that was published a number of years ago, very influential study with several thousand people. We text them and we ask them 3 questions. The first question is, what are you doing right now? And they check off from a list of activities. Second question, where is your mind right now? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused elsewhere? And the third question is, at this very moment, How happy or unhappy are you? Here's what was found. The average American adult spends 47% of her or his waking life not paying attention to what we're doing. Folks, we could do better. And when they were not paying attention to what they're doing, they were significantly less happy. The scientific paper upon which this is based was titled, "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." In addition, there is a huge increase in the incidence of attention deficit disorders in children in this country. This is a graph showing a trend over the last decade. There are many reasons for this increase, but some of them have to do with a genuine increase in distractibility. If we're all honest with ourselves, our nation is suffering not simply from a fiscal deficit, but from an attention deficit. We also are suffering from loneliness. Despite the fact that we're all so much more interconnected, 76% of middle-aged Americans report that they have moderate to high levels of loneliness. And this loneliness is not an ephemeral, subjective state. It also impacts our bodies, our physical health. Recent research shows that loneliness is actually a more significant predictor by more than a twofold magnitude of early mortality compared to obesity. So this exacts real tolls on our brains and our bodies. And again, research shows we can do better. Negative self-talk and depression, we all have a narrative in our mind that we carry around about who we are. And sometimes we have negative beliefs about ourselves, which can culminate in depression. And this turns out to be a very serious problem. Depression is on the rise. If you look at trends just over the last few years, what you see is a very large increase, particularly among women. Over the last 3 years alone, there's been a 33% increase in diagnoses of major depression in women. And this trend is occurring in teens as well. These are disturbing trends in kids ages 12 through 17, and the gender difference also is very, unfortunately, robust, where the incidence is much greater in females, and this trend is getting worse over time. And again, the evidence suggests that we can actually train our mind and harness the power of neuroplasticity to change these qualities in our mind. Suicide rates are very disturbing. During the Great Depression, there was a huge elevation, and those rates have come back down. And then since the year 2000, there has been, unfortunately, a steep rise in suicide rates. And again, this is not something restricted to adults. Our teens are showing more than doubling over the last 10 years in suicides, so that today in the United States, unfortunately, more than one teenager every single day is taking her or his own life. There also is a pervasive loss of meaning and purpose that people are reporting. And this loss is not simply, again, a subjective quality, but also exacts a toll on our health and other aspects of our well-being. Research shows that a lack of purpose predicts an early death. In a recent study, people who were in their 60s with a low sense of purpose had more than twice the likelihood of dying within 5 years compared to people who reported a high sense of purpose. So again, there are intimate connections between our psychological well-being and our systemic health. Each of these challenges affects the mind and the brain. We're not thriving, but the invitation is that we really could be. So we've developed a framework for understanding a healthy mind. And this framework includes 4 pillars. The first pillar is awareness. And awareness includes the capacity to focus our attention, to resist distraction. It also includes a quality that psychologists and neuroscientists call meta-awareness. Meta-awareness is knowing what our minds are doing. How many of you have ever had the experience of reading a book where you're reading each word on a page, and you read one page, you may read a second page, and after a few minutes you have absolutely no idea what you've just read? That is an example of a lapse in meta-awareness. But the moment we recognize that we've been lost and come back, that is a moment of meta-awareness. And we have reason to believe that meta-awareness is crucial. Actually, it's necessary, we believe, for real transformation to occur. The second pillar of a healthy mind is connection. Connection refers to those qualities which nurture harmonious interpersonal relationships. Qualities like appreciation, like kindness, like compassion, having a positive outlook. And again, the research shows that it doesn't take much to start activating these latent qualities which can flourish and become stronger. The third pillar of a healthy mind is insight. And insight is about insight into the narrative that we all have about ourselves. At the very extreme end of the continuum, there are people who have a very negative narrative. They have negative self-beliefs, and they hold those beliefs to be a true description of who they are. That is a prescription for depression. And a healthy mind entails changing our relationship to this narrative. Not so much changing the narrative itself, but changing our relationship to it, so that we can look at the narrative and see it for what it is. What is this narrative? It's a constellation of thoughts. And when we can see it as that, we can foster more room, more breathing room, and this leads to increased well-being. Finally, the last pillar of a healthy mind is purpose. And here, we're talking about having a sense that our life is headed in a particular direction. And most importantly, it is about taking more and more of the activities in our lives as belonging to this sense of purpose. Can you envision living your life so that taking out the garbage and doing the laundry is still related to your sense of purpose? Being able to broaden it in this way is a very crucial ingredient of a healthy mind. Have you ever trained your mind? Research from neuroscience leads us to understand that there are 2 fundamentally different kinds of learning. One form of learning we call declarative learning, which is learning about things. I can learn the value of kindness by sitting down and studying texts about kindness, but this won't necessarily lead us to become kinder. We can teach people the value of honesty, but this will not necessarily make them an honest person. In order to cultivate these qualities, we need a second form of learning, and that is called procedural learning. Neuroscience teaches us that these kinds of learning operate through totally different brain circuits. We need both to produce real transformation. The wiring in our brains is not fixed, it's adaptable, and we can harness the power of neuroplasticity to change our brain. Let me give you one example. This is an example from research that we did where we randomized people to a group that received compassion training for 2 weeks, another group that received training from cognitive therapy. We put people in the MRI scanner before and after the 2 weeks of training, and lo and behold, we see systematic differences after just 7 hours of practice. Our brains can change in a remarkably rapid period of time. The changes that are displayed here are changes in a circuit that involve the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum, a circuit very important for certain kinds of positive emotions, which gets strengthened after just this short amount of practice. So these and other kinds of data indicate that the brain really can change quite quickly. It doesn't mean that these changes will last, but it means that they can occur, they can begin, and with systematic practice, they will endure. We view this as an urgent public health need. So we need to start someplace. I would recommend 3 minutes a day. When human beings first evolved on this planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. And yet, today, we all do. This is not part of our genome. This is a learned behavior. And it doesn't take much to start these mechanisms in the brain to change. So we can do this when we're doing other things. We can do this while we're commuting. We can do this as we're literally brushing our teeth. We can do this as we're having our first cup of coffee or tea in the morning. We can do this as we're walking. This can be incorporated in routines of our daily life. So we can nourish our mind, and through it we can change the world. We can reduce implicit bias that gets under the skin. This is something that we've shown can occur with strengthening connection. We can increase school achievement, and we've and others have shown this with training in awareness. We can reduce healthcare costs potentially by cultivating well-being, as the connections that I've illustrated show. We can cultivate a strong sense of purpose, we can reduce distraction, and we can increase productivity and focus. And I'd like to end with just a 1-minute short period of practice to give you an experiential taste of this. So if you all just sit for a moment, put down your pens and devices, and I invite you to bring a loved one into your mind and your heart. You can leave your eyes open or closed. And for those who are viewing this online, please share this 1 minute with us. And as you bring this loved one into your mind and your heart, cultivate the strong aspiration that they be happy and be free of suffering. And they share the same wish for happiness and the same wish to be free of suffering as all human beings. And you can envision a time in their life when they may have been having some difficulty, and you can say a simple phrase in your mind: may you be happy, may you be free of suffering. And simply notice whatever may come up for you. And then we can do this for many categories of people, including a difficult person. So I invite you to join us on this journey, and the very future of humanity, we think, depends on it. Thank you very much.
If you struggle with complex PTSD or trauma, you need to understand this chart. I'm going to go as in-depth as I can on this. Might have to do multiple parts. We'll see how it goes. So this chart is from polyvagal theory, and it helps you measure the activation state of your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. These are part of your autonomic nervous system. More on that in another video. The green zone is your parasympathetic nervous system. This is rest and digest. This is what internal family systems calls self-energy, where you're feeling calm, cool, collected, curious, compassionate, the 8 C's of self. Above that is this yellow zone. The yellow zone is a sympathetic state. This is when you are turning on that activation energy. And this doesn't just have to be in relation to trauma, although it is activated in those cases as well. It could be as simple as going to work out. That puts you in a sympathetic state as well. And finally is this red zone where your parasympathetic nervous system turns back on yet again because it is too activated. It's hyperactivated, so it has to pull this lever and say, whoa, whoa, chill out. Your heart's going to explode if you get any more activated. In a normal, healthy individual that hasn't experienced trauma, generally you're going from green to yellow throughout your day, right? So you go work out and you go up into yellow, and then you rest and recover afterwards, and your muscles grow, you get back stronger. That is a normal and healthy way to navigate green, yellow, green, yellow. What happens over time, especially in relation to complex PTSD, which is persistent trauma over time, is that you go up to this yellow zone and you keep climbing because you are continuously getting activated and you never have a chance to recover. So imagine going to the gym and doing bench press or doing curls and never stopping, never, ever, ever stopping doing those curls. You just keep going forever. What eventually happens is your muscles, your brain shuts down your muscles because you are destroying your muscles. That's essentially what is happening in your brain. You see this in animals all the time. I'm sure you've seen a possum that plays dead. That's that freeze response. You get so activated, you move up into this freeze zone where you feel hopeless and helpless, and your body starts to prepare for death. You're numb, you dissociate, you're feeling trapped. And worst of all, you probably feel an immense amount of shame that you're here. The kicker is when you get up to this red zone and you start to recover and do the things to heal yourself, you move back down into the yellow zone, right? What happens in the yellow zone, that is a sympathetic state. So you start to get anxious, you start to feel panic, you start to feel these powerful emotions like fear, terror, horror. And so you're like, oh crap, and it shoots you back up into the red zone. So now you're stuck in a cycle of red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow. And you can never get back down to green. This is what makes healing trauma so difficult and not a straight line at all. It takes a toll on your mind, brain, and body. If you'd like to learn how to break out of this cycle, DM me the word release, and I'll send you the guide I just created to do this.
You've heard of PTSD, and you might have heard of complex PTSD, but what's the difference? Here are 8 things that make them different. Frequency and duration is number 1. Unlike PTSD, which is from a single event, complex PTSD is prolonged trauma over time, maybe months or years even. Emotional regulation is number 2. People with complex PTSD may have a harder time managing their emotions, leading to unexpected outbursts. Number 3 is an altered self-perception. You're constantly feeling guilt and shame and seeing yourself as bad or broken. Next up is having a hard time forming interpersonal relationships stemming from trust issues. All right, next is detachment. This is where you feel disconnected from reality or even with yourself. Loss of systemic belief is next. This is where you lose faith in the fairness of society or the people around you. Persistent sadness is another one. This is unlike occasional sadness and more persistent and profound, kind of like depression. Last is physical symptoms. Okay, this could be unexplainable physical things. It could be migraines, it could be chronic pain or stress in your lower back or your muscles. Recognizing these signs is step 1. Your brain, altered by trauma, can still rewire and heal. You have the power to steer your healing journey. Follow us for more on complex PTSD.
Here are 4 symptoms of complex PTSD and what they might look like in real life. Number 1 is hypervigilance. It's probably one of the most common ones. This could look like being startled really easily, acting more careful or more watchful overall. Number 2 is intrusive memories or re-experiencing. This could look like nightmares, flashbacks, or traumatic reenactment. Number 3 is memory and attention issues. I see this one a lot as well. This could look like trouble focusing, having fragmented memories, or just being forgetful. And number 4 is emotional regulation struggles, which is one of the hallmarks of complex PTSD. This could look like overwhelming emotions that you can't regulate, self-harm, or even crisis. If you'd like to beat symptoms like this, comment the word release so that you can start to regulate your nervous system, release stored trauma, and get on the healing journey.
What if I told you that you could overcome anything? That there isn't a circumstance or situation known to man that you cannot overcome. That you are indeed unbreakable. Would you believe me? And more importantly than me telling you, if you told yourself those things, would you believe you? I want to talk to you about a critical element of happiness, success, and overcoming obstacles, resilience, and how it's built through some of the most painful moments. I'm not sure what the ideal route to a TED Talk is, but I'm guessing that my journey isn't it. I was born and raised in Oakland, California, coming of age in the 1980s, and it's nearly 20% unemployment rate for blacks, systemic housing segregation and discrimination, education inequities, high poverty and murder rates, and the dawn of the crack epidemic and its partner, the war on drugs, that made historical criminal justice inequities even worse. Against that backdrop, I also came of age with a mother who would become an addict and a father who, though his listed occupation on my birth certificate says custodian, he was also a pimp. Despite their flaws and doing the best that they could in a situation that exploited the worst of themselves, I knew that my parents loved me to pieces, and I loved them to pieces. My mom had custody of me as we moved and settled into Acorn housing projects in West Oakland. It's during a 3-year period between age 7 and 10 years old that some of the most traumatic yet vivid moments of my childhood would play out as my mother's disease of addiction took root. When I close my eyes, I see them all just as clearly today as they happened decades ago. Like the time I discovered my mother's boyfriend, eyes wide open, laying on the floor of a drug overdose. A discovery that initially paralyzed me in fear, much in the same way that his body lay motionless at my feet as he blankly stared at the ceiling. Like the day my mother sat me down on my bed to read me a handwritten letter that my dad had written and sent me in the mail. It would be the first time I'd ever heard the 5-syllable word incarcerated and learned what it meant. Like the day my grandmother, who took over raising me when we were evicted out of the projects due to my mother's addiction, received a call to inform me that my father, after being jumped in a prison fight, was brain dead. He would die later that night before I ever saw him again alive. Like the times I would later visit my own mother in jail, a hazy plexiglass window separating us physically and emotionally, while also serving to remind me of the fate that my father met in those very walls. I felt the pain, the sadness, the shame, the solitude, the adjectives that as a preteen meet the clinical definitions of depression. Yet when I opened my eyes, the worst of life couldn't take out the best of me, because I'm still standing here in front of you. Despite being truly disadvantaged, I stand here in front of you having overcome all those things and more. I would emerge as the first in my family to graduate college, earning undergraduate and master's business degrees, then on to a nearly 2-decade corporate career before starting my own venture. I've been from the projects to exploring a couple dozen countries across the world. From poverty to being the furthest from broke and broken that I've ever been. From tragedy to triumph, I have overcome, and even already, I have succeeded. Now, I could entertain and engross you in a fascinating story of how, but that's not nearly as important as a different question. Why? Why do I and others still succeed and flourish despite immense pain and trauma? Those people, and myself, they aren't just strong or thick-skinned or good at compartmentalizing. What they are is resilient. You see, change, it's a constant in life. Nothing gives us immunity from it. Resilience is the capacity to adapt to negative change and recover from it as quickly as possible. Now, note that I said negative change, as you typically don't need any help in coping with positive change, right? You get the job that you interviewed for and it comes with a 30% pay increase. Or you find out class is canceled the day that you have an exam that you haven't prepared for. Oh, it's a bunch of A students in here, right? It's just me. Okay. Well, those are really good things. And so you don't need any help or strategies on how to cope with the good fortune. It's the negative things, the hurtful things, the bad things in life, where our level of resilience matters. How we process, respond to, and act will have huge implications on where the story goes from there. Whether we succumb to it or we surmount it. But understand, to exercise resilience, some change in circumstances must have happened. Some change in circumstances must have happened. The idea is to understand your belief system. Your beliefs impact your feelings. Your feelings impact how you think about things, and your thoughts ultimately impact how you act and respond. I discovered this truth not through some bolt from the clouds, some specific aha moment, but from going through and escaping my own hell as a youngster. There were some excruciatingly painful, gut-wrenching days. Days where I didn't even know how I was going to move forward, and the only thing that I could cling to was an irrational hope. A belief that tomorrow would be better than today, sometimes without even really truly believing it myself. But there I was, trying to make each moment better than the next. Today better than tomorrow, without sacrificing my future for today's pain. Even at a young age, and despite not knowing what scholars and researchers were already confirming, I was laying the foundation of resilience by using the most important resource available to me: my mind. I wish I could say that the bad luck truck stopped dropping boxes of trauma off at my doorstep when I was a kid, but life doesn't adhere to any delivery windows. Change comes whenever it comes, and for as long as we all live. After my childhood, I'd go on to experience the death of family and friends, job loss, financial issues, health crisis, all the things that life has a tendency to throw at us. Show you how much of a comedian God is, He gave me a breakup, heartbreak, and distraction to start this very week as I was preparing to talk to you about resilience. Like, really? Now? Now? So what does trauma teach us about resilience? Sometimes we need to tell ourselves what to think when our mind starts telling us things that we don't need to hear. That you can and will overcome and succeed. And not just in spite of, but precisely because of. That with the proper perspective and a positive attitude, we have power. That life is easier when you're prepared. And just because you can't plan for everything, doesn't mean you can't be ready for something. That perspective sometimes requires partnership and perseverance. And understand, sometimes it gets hard, and it's tough, and it's painful. You get tired, you get weak, and when you don't know how to keep going, sometimes all the strength you need is the strength to ask others for help. That it's okay to acknowledge that I was a victim, but refuse to own being a victim. You get that subtle distinction, that difference between past and present tense? That gives us power. Power to change the way we think, power to change our circumstances, and ultimately power to overcome. Because of my faith, I've long been a believer that everything happens for a reason. Some reasons are immediately available to you, others take time to reveal themselves. As I was piecing together my talk, one of the central questions I kept coming back to was, who am I talking to? I ultimately realized that I was talking to the adolescent me, the college me, the professional me, even the future me with life adversity yet to be encountered. The varying versions of me is who I was telling, you are indeed unbreakable, that you can overcome anything. But if you happen to find a little something in your eavesdropping to help you through whatever adversity you face, then I was talking to the adolescent you, the college you, the corporate you, the professional you, the future you, too. And more than anything, I thank you for giving my trauma a purpose. Thank you.